Good morning, everyone. My name is Katie Rogers, and I'm the Knowledge Exchange Manager at YouthRex, Youth Research and Evaluation Exchange. And I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar on youth-centered approaches to meaningful engagement. And today is part 2 of our series, and we're focusing on engaging youth in program evaluation. So welcome to everyone who is joining us from across the province today. We're going to start today with a land acknowledgement. YouthRex's provincial office is located at York University. Both YouthRex and York University acknowledge their presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belts Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. A few things to keep in mind for today's webinar. We are recording this webinar, so it will be uploaded to both the YouthRex website and to our Exchange for Youth Work. If you have any trouble with the audio quality, please try calling in with a telephone. A little bit about YouthRex. Our vision is an Ontario where shared knowledge is transformed into positive impact for all youth. And our mission is to make research evidence and evaluation accessible and relevant to Ontario's youth sector through knowledge exchange, capacity building, and evaluation leadership. We work across the province of Ontario. We have regional hubs at the School of Social Work at Laurentian University. That's our northern hub. Our eastern hub is at the School of Social Work at Carleton University. Our provincial office is here at the School of Social Work at York University. We also are in the southwest region of Ontario at King's University College at Western University, and we have a community hub at the United Way of Windsor. As I mentioned, we do a variety of different work through what we call our 3 streams. Knowledge exchange, which includes activities like today's webinar. YouthRex Ed, which comprises a variety of professional development opportunities in person and online. And youth program supports, which is a comprehensive suite of services that we provide to youth organizations across Ontario to support evidence-informed practice. And now I'm going to hand it over to our facilitator for the day. Dr. Corliss Bean is our research and evaluation specialist here at YouthRex. She's going to introduce you to today's panelists and also go over the outline for the presentation today. So take it away, Corliss.
Thanks, Katie. Good morning, everyone. As Katie mentioned, my name is Corliss Bean, and I am the research and evaluation specialist here at YouthRex for about the past 2 years. So today we are joined by 3 very special guests. So we have Olga, we have Liam, and we have JJ. So I'll first allow the opportunity for Olga to introduce herself. She's from Groundswell Project, and she has a really exciting project to share that she's been working on that's that we've been working in collaboration with for the past couple of years.
Hi, everyone. My name is Olga Smenovich. I am a design researcher and strategist at Groundswell Projects. And we worked on a program called Growing Out, Evaluation and Impact Youth Grown Tools Program with FoodShare and Sustain Ontario. Corliss, if you just want to go to the next slide. So just a bit about Groundswell Projects. We're a design thinking consultancy, and we work with clients that are really interested in various industries and sectors that are really interested in changing the status quo and doing some innovative things in their industry and sector. And our focus is on helping clients to understand, empathize, and design for people that they care about the most, be it their users, their stakeholders, or the broader communities. We work very cross-sectorally, and the focus is highly on human values as the starting point for all the work. And the project that we worked on with Sustain Ontario and FoodShare was called Growing Out, like the short name for it. It engaged 4 organizations that work in community-based food throughout Ontario, 3 in Toronto and 1 in Thunder Bay. And all of these organizations, you can see them on your screen, they have youth-focused programs around food justice and sustainability. And we worked with their youth participants to undertake the first youth-led evaluation of these programs. So we had, we'll go into details of that, but we had basically 4 collaborative learning workshops with them and 12 follow-up sessions. And youth essentially were in the lead of the entire evaluation process, working together with the managers as well.
Great, thank you, Olga. So now I'll let Liam introduce himself, who is the Associate Executive Director at Christie Light Kids.
Thanks very much, Corliss. Good morning, everyone. So my name's Liam McGuire. As Corliss said, I'm the Associate Executive Director with Christie Light Kids. And we're an organization that have been delivering programs for the last 96 years, starting in 1922 to the Ottawa community. And our program was started by a group of Ottawa judges who saw a lot of children getting in trouble with the law and wanted to come up with a progressive alternative for them. And our program over about 50 years was developed by the child psychologist, Dr. Dan Offord, who really brought in a lot of the principles of skill building that we work with today. And over the last 30 years, the program has really evolved from being not only just a camp-based program, but also working with communities in Ottawa to provide inner city programming year round. And to date, we serve about 600 children and youth through what we call our Transformative Recreation Program model. And all of our programs are provided fully subsidized to families within the low income economic bracket in Ottawa. And we really place an emphasis on working with and following up with every participant from the age of about 6 all the way to the age of 16. And the fundamental element of programs is really building those strong relationships, which kind of I'll touch on later on just in terms of how we work with youth in our programs. And that's really something crucial for us. So our Leaders in Training program is for youth, again, from low-income economic backgrounds between 13 and 16. And it operates both in the city, in Ottawa, and at our summer camp. And the program is really based on building leadership skills for these youth over a 3-year structure. So meeting every week and building skills over those 3 years. It's highly integrated into the rest of our programs. Participants start again when they're young children and over time develop into the leaders within our LIT program. And the goals of our program are really to provide a supportive and social space for learning, where they work very closely with adult volunteers. And what we want to do in this program is work with youth to build and reinforce skills that will lead to resiliency later on in their lives, especially as they go into their upper years of high school. And currently we are right now in the process of redeveloping our leadership programs. And a big part of that is developing an evaluation strategy to make sure that we're on track, and YouthRex has been a big part of that.
Excellent, thank you, Liam. So we will now switch over to Jathusha, also known as JJ, who is the founder and executive director of an organization called Light.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Corliss, for the introduction. My name is Jathusha Mahindarajan, and I'm the founder and ED for Light. I'm also a youth research assistant at YouthRex. So Light is a youth grassroots organization in York Region, and we equip young people with the 21st century employable skills and knowledge that they need to be able to facilitate social change projects in their communities. So we have 6 different programs that each tackle a different issue. Like the names are like Start Small, Books Before Looks, Spark Health, One Child, One World, Leaders for Liberty, and Change Starts Today. So there's over 55 positions in our team, and young people, majority high school students, except for a couple university undergrad students, hold all of these positions. Adult allies are a huge part of our programming, as well as they're part of our advisory committee, and they support us when we need support and in the ways that we ask for support, which we make clear. And so how the breakdown of positions looks like is there's an executive team, and then there's for each youth program, there's a director, a co-director, and then around 4 youth program facilitators. The role of the executive team is to help the other young people in our 6 programs to be able to design and deliver their initiatives. So from finance to marketing to program planning and delivery. to, of course, evaluation, young people are doing it all, and showing how youth-led innovation can truly make a difference.
Great. Thank you, Jathusha. Okay, so just to go over the outline for today's webinar, first I will just take an opportunity to welcome back anybody that engaged in our first webinar last week, which was all on program planning. And what we'll do is we'll borrow and build off that to really focus on evaluation today. So first, we'll really speak to setting the context. So we'll talk a little bit about evaluation within the youth sector and its importance, and then dive right into the actual youth engagement process and what it means to engage youth in this process. Then we'll divide the evaluation process into 3 phases, which you can engage youth within the process related to planning, implementation, and then also the creation and dissemination of our evaluation findings. And throughout these 3 phases, what we will do is we'll have our community partners and our guests share how they actually engage youth within these areas. And then what we'll do at the end of each of these 3 phases, we'll open the floor to questions. So if you specifically have a question related to evaluation implementation or evaluation planning, we'll open the floor and you can ask those questions there. And then finally, we'll wrap up with our guests sharing some key lessons learned and take a final opportunity for questions. So in terms of setting the context, within the youth sector, there has been greater and greater focus on meeting funders' demands in terms of providing and proving program outcomes and effectiveness, even in a short time frame. And I've worked quite a bit with a lot of different organizations and who stress over the fact that they're trying to prove to the funders that a 6-week program changed the world, or it had a huge impact, and we know that that's not really realistic or feasible to do such big things in such a short time frame. So therefore, as an applied field and within our sector, we're really trying to reframe evaluation. And by doing this, we're trying to broaden how we view evidence by taking into consideration what we actually mean by defining it. So not just focusing on outcomes, but looking at processes and evaluation in terms of lessons learned, looking at program improvement, and also not just using our quantitative approaches like questionnaires, but also looking at qualitative approaches for youth to be able to share their stories, experiences, and so on. So we know that evaluation is important to the youth sector, but sometimes we need to reinforce that the evaluation is not just to report back to the funder at the end of a project. So by encouraging the sustainable evaluation practices, the youth sector and youth organizations can actually be in a better position to manage, measure, and track their programs in terms of those outcomes, but also look at program successes, how they can actually improve, building upon, and then also be able to tell their stories and learn from not only telling their stories to their funders, but also learn from other programs so that we can improve the overall quality of the sector. And I think a big thing to really kind of keep in mind is that the goal of this evaluation is really to think about that evaluation should support youth programs to do what they do, but better. So when we think about youth engagement, building off our last week's webinar, we talked a lot about the fact that youth engagement involves meaningfully and sustained participation of young people in activities that actually matter to them. So I think a key word to take away from that is the meaningful piece and the fact that youth need to be motivated to engage and feel a sense of importance in their roles within a program and within evaluation. So as discussed last week in the webinar, we talked about the fact that there's not just one common definition for youth engagement. The process can look very different for different programs, for different people, and also thinking about different needs and resources that are available. However, when we think about it, it can often include involvement in decision-making, promotion of leadership, having supportive adult allies, and listening to and respecting the ideas of youth. So specifically, when we think about evaluation, this can occur at the program, organization, and system level. However, for today, we'll really be focusing on more of those programs. So thinking about how we can do these sort of things in terms to improve that one specific program that you're working with, and then you can kind of from there build and scale up or scale down related to looking at both organization and system. And then one thing to kind of really keep in mind is that through involving youth through the process and building off what we learned last week, program design and development can inform the program evaluation. So youth should be involved throughout the entire process. So not just having them come in for one piece, having them involved throughout the entire process can be very beneficial, not only for the youth, but also for the program at that program level for sustainability, consistency, and clear messages across the whole program spectrum. So this quote from Kim, Kim is a well-known and well-established researcher in the field on youth engagement, and she specifically focuses on youth-adult partnerships and youth-led evaluation. And I think this quote really speaks to the involvement of youth in these processes as a collaboration throughout the entire evaluation process. So it eliminates that hierarchy between adults and youth, and we know that this is often a challenge because oftentimes adults are accustomed to not sharing power with youth, particularly around evaluation. So because of this, I think it's really critical to recognize that as a field and as a sector, we need to move beyond youth as a source of data. So whether just because we have youth involved in filling out questionnaires as a respondent, as a source of data in terms of whether they participated in an interview, it's not enough to really show that true youth engagement. So we need to, again, move beyond this and really involve them throughout the process. And last week's webinar did a really great job of outlining how this can be done through program development and planning. So here we'll really focus on that evaluation component. So I wanted to share this continuum of youth engagement with you, and this really illustrates how youth engagement can be done throughout the evaluation process at a lot of different levels. So when we start at the bottom there, looking at how there's no youth engagement at all, whereas this is when an outside adult actually conducts the research or the evaluation without collecting any sort of information from youth. So speaking to that lowest level, and oftentimes we think, when we think about general youth programs, from a lot of my personal experience and just knowing the field, a lot of programs tend to be on that very low spectrum. So in terms of engaging youth, it tends to be that information is collected from the youth. So as I mentioned, youth are completing questionnaires, youth are engaging in focus groups or interviews, so they're being used as a source of data. But the importance of that is that we want to kind of move from that lower level of the continuum across to higher levels on the continuum, so that we are allowing youth to have some sort of input, participate in the actual research design, being able to conduct evaluation, to help analyze the data, to actually be involved in the translation. So I think this webinar will do a great job of, and our guests today will really speak to all these different levels and how the youth are involved in various processes. But I think one kind of thing to keep in mind with this is that it's not always feasible to go to that highest level and do 100% across all different levels and all different areas. So when we think about planning and actual implementation, so it's important to not try and do too much with the resources and our capacity that we have as an organization and use capacity. So recognizing that what is the best way to engage youth in what processes and how that can kind of look the best for your program and your organization. So as I said, I think throughout this webinar today, a lot of our guests will really do a great job of, not all of them are at the highest, but they're speaking of how we can move from that continuum across from being none or very low to higher youth engagement in that process. So this webinar will really be framed by YouthRex's framework for evaluating youth well-being. And last week, Stephanie, who facilitated this webinar, spoke of how program planning really fits within this framework for evaluation created by YouthRex in terms of specifically developing logic models and really understanding your program. So today we will also use this as a guide, and basically for those that are not familiar, this is a 3-phase, 7-step process for actually implementing and developing an evaluation plan. And this is divided into discovery, action, and legacy. So predominantly today we'll focus on the action and the legacy, because that discovery piece really speaks more to program planning. But we will speak to all of these throughout. So this framework is really guided by 3 different lenses, which helps youth programs think about how an evaluation can actually be aligned with the context of their organization or their program, including their vision, their mission, their values. So the 3 lenses really open youth programs to the option to choose from many different designs, evaluation designs that are available, different approaches, different methods. And the first lens really thinks about or focuses on having a learning focused lens. So again, going back to the fact that we're changing the view of what evaluation means, it's not solely just on reporting to our funders, it's learning from the evidence, understanding how we can improve our program and really kind of continue to build and learn from that instead of just proving what's going well and what's not going well within our program. And then the second lens really focuses on contextualized methods. So the fact that we are not just focusing on one particular method or one particular source of data, but the fact that we can use multiple sources of data, multiple methods. So whether that's a combination of interviews, focus groups, arts-based questionnaires, and again, we're not just gathering data from perhaps youth, but youth, program leaders, staff, parents, guardians, and so forth. And then the last lens here is really the focus of today's webinar, is ensuring that our evaluations are actually youth engaged. So in terms of doing this, we want to ensure that we're meaningfully engaging youth throughout the entire process. And we know that there is extensive research evidence that shows that meaningfully involving youth strengthens evaluations of youth programs. So it improves the overall quality of the evaluation process, and it can benefit the program and the wider community as a whole. So in terms of a quick recap from some of the benefits that have been discussed last week, and just going a little bit further and tailoring that specifically to evaluation, we can think about the fact that youth often benefit from engagement within the process. Again, if they're meaningfully engaged, they're motivated to be involved. They can develop a lot of marketable skills that they can use not only at school, outside of the program for work, such as opportunities for leadership, developing and fostering communication skills, but also thinking about relationship building, that they're fostering various social competencies and learning how to actually interact with not only their other adults, but also peers as well. And youth can then learn to work as a team, problem solve, create solutions, look at things from different angles, and learn to appreciate perspectives of others. And then more globally, thinking about the notion of self-confidence. So when youth can collaborate and contribute, they recognize that they have valuable skills, that they're meaningfully engaged, and that they can actually make a difference, which is very important as well. And then on the larger side of things, looking at the actual benefits for the evaluation, or the stakeholders that are also involved in the evaluation, is they might have better access to data, so access to harder to reach samples because they have youth involved in the process. They can gain and establish new perspectives, really to improve the holistic understanding of the evaluation process, looking at understanding new results by the way that youth are kind of the lens that youth are bringing to this. Improve data collection processes, so looking at how the data is actually collected. And I think a big thing here is it helps to inform the best practices. It helps to inform the challenges that are ongoing in terms of how we can continue to improve that program to best meet the needs of youth. And a big one to acknowledge is validating the diverse experiences of youth and recognizing that by engaging youth in this process, it helps to equalize the power relationships between adults and youth. So before we begin our first section here, we're going to launch a poll just to kind of see who's on the webinar today in terms of what their experience is with engaging youth within the evaluation process. So I'll let Katie launch that poll. So the poll is, are you currently engaging youth in any part of the evaluation process? So we'll just give you a minute there. Okay, so it seems like some of you are and some of you are not. So we have, hopefully then, we have more that are not doing it. So hopefully today we can give you some really great insight and some tips and strategies that you can use to integrate. Sorry, it's super small on my screen, so I can't actually see the percentages, but we'll move on.
Thank you. It's about 58% of folks who responded to the poll are, and
okay, thank you.
52% are not. So it's not quite half and half. More folks responded are doing it. Work, but yeah, but lots of sharing and learning to do today, I think.
Excellent, thank you. Okay. All right, so moving on to evaluation planning. As I mentioned, we're going to use the YouthRex's framework for evaluating youth well-being as kind of a guide as we go through this. So when we really think about the planning, again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because oftentimes our last webinar really covered a lot of planning in terms of before we get to evaluation, but there's still a lot of overlap between the two. And when we think about the actual learning to understand your program, developing a logic model, that logic model helps with program planning, but it also helps with focusing your evaluation. So the second step of this framework really looks at understanding your program, actually using a logic model, understanding what your program theory is, and making sure that you have your evaluation questions developed and that you know what outcomes and what processes are in place so that you can best suit and best frame your actual evaluation. And then our step 3, which is focusing and planning your evaluation, you want to make sure that you're engaging, you know who to engage within that process. So what stakeholders are you actually going to bring in here, including youth? So recognizing who should be involved in that evaluation process. And again, this is a really great time to involve youth in that process if they were not involved in the program planning. So I think that's one big kind of take home or thing to recognize right now is, say you're halfway through a program, and perhaps youth were not involved in the actual program planning piece, it's not too late to still involve youth, and you can bring them in for the actual involvement and engagement within the evaluation process. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch gears, and I'm going to open the floor to Olga right now, who is going to share some of her lessons learned in terms of how she actually engaged youth within the process.
Thanks, Corliss. We actually used YouthRex framework for evaluating youth well-being as part of our approach and when we designed the program. And the second half of it is that as a design thinking company, we focus on using creative methods and really focusing on bringing out individuals' creativity in the process and making it engaging and fun. We just as a general structure of the program, we had 3 workshops where they were structured around each of the phases of the evaluation framework. And so the first one focused on the logic models and understanding the theory of change of the program. And the second one, and also learning about evaluation methods. The second one delved more deeper into the evaluation methods and planning the evaluation itself, the approach. And then the third one was about analyzing and communicating the findings. You can see some pictures from the workshop there. Sorry about that. We have a slide. Essentially in the workshops, we designed them with some activities that were engaging for youth. We had both youth and program managers in the same room, which was important to build kind of the dynamic of diffusing power inequality and really mutual learning, because the feedback that we got was that not only youth learned, but also the program managers learned with them. And so having that shared base of knowledge was really important. We also focused on giving youth the role of actually producing some learning materials. So for example, to learn about the evaluation methods, we had youth pick different methods that they were interested in and then create videos on their own time that would share and demonstrate how to apply this method. And so this happened in between workshops. So we had the workshops that we came together, to work through some of the basics and learn together, and then youth worked on some homework in between that they then brought back to the next workshop. So these videos that youth created about the different methods were really useful, and we reflected on them together as a group, and they were then able to really bring out the weaknesses and the strengths of each method, and learn that way. And then, so in between the workshops, we also held individual sessions because there were 4 programs involved. So we met separately with each of the groups to really focus on working through, let's say, the logic model for their specific organization, or developing the evaluation plan and the questions for the specific organization. Because in the workshops, it was more about learning together and using activities to kind of understand what these terms mean, how can they be applied in very simple examples. For example, for the logic model, we used a family picnic to how do you plan a family picnic using a logic model. So things like that. But we actually found that the logic model was one of the most challenging concepts for youth to grasp, because it felt very academic. And so as a reflection going at the end of the program, we were thinking that there may be some other ideas that we can use to represent the logic model, for example, a tree or some other methods that can be more relevant for people. Corliss? Oh, yeah, so these are some of the further pictures from our workshops. We had one group in Thunder Bay, and so 2 out of 3 workshops were done with them joining us online on video. And one time they joined the group in Toronto, actually, and so then they were able to then visit each other's sites, because all the programs are focused on food growing and some sort of urban agriculture. So they visited the sites of the other youth-led programs, and that really helped to create a bonding experience for the group when they were all together in one room. They were always together in one room, but that time they were actually in the same room as a group. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Olga. So I will pass it over to Liam.
Hi. So in terms of our work engaging youth in the evaluation planning process, a lot of this is actually new to us. We've had a leaders in training program for a number of years now, but the idea of really engaging youth in that evaluation process is one that is quite new for us, and really wrapped up with the whole process of how we develop the program as well. So as we go through this whole process, starting almost from the ground up in some ways, that whole question of how we engage youth in the evaluation planning process is really key to how we restructure and rebuild the program overall. So one thing that we've really noticed so far is just the importance of planning ahead. So as I'm sure many people watching this can attest to, within a nonprofit organization, everyone's wearing many hats. And something can come up one day that may completely throw off your schedule for the next few days. So it's difficult to accurately plan that you can focus on one project at a time. So what we've noticed is really the importance to plan to engage with youth, say in the middle of your program cycle, rather than towards the end. So even if we say are planning to start a process within the last couple of weeks, trying to get that started maybe 1 or 2 months in advance, so that if something does come up, we have some flexibility in our timelines, and we can really give the time that we need and that the youth deserve to sit down with them and to work with them in the way that we need to make sure that this is a meaningful process. The second point that came up for us was just communicating honestly with youth in our program. So when preparing your evaluation strategy, something that we've really found so far is that it's really important to treat them, and as has already been mentioned so far, as an equal stakeholder in the process. Whether our youth are just starting with us and are 13, 14 and just getting used to the program, or they are 16, 17 years old and they are really involved in the program, getting involved in the organization in other ways, throughout whatever stage, whatever level of the program that they're in, it's really important that we treat them as an equal stakeholder, because the information that we get back from is going to be honest. If we treat them as an equal, they're going to be giving us more equal and more honest feedback, because they know that there's that trust. And again, a big part of that goes back to building relationships and building honesty throughout all the programs, but also through the evaluation process. And the third point that we just have here is just really, again, using that honesty and that relationship building to ask youth what they need from the program. So in our current process of developing evaluations for our leaders in training program, this was one of the first questions we asked our LITs, and it was a question we realized that we hadn't necessarily always asked in the past. Right from the get-go, we've realized that with this process of planning evaluations, we need to ask the youth in our programs what they need from us, and what keeps them engaged. So what do they need to keep them engaged over the 3-4 years that they're with us in this program? And asking that question right from the get-go is helping us to guide the development of our program outcomes. And in turn, it's also going to guide the evaluation questions that are going to help us make sure that we're meeting those outcomes.
Excellent. Thank you, Liam. So I will pass it over to Jathusha, who will talk about the LIGHT program.
So for us, in how we engage youth in the evaluation planning process, so we have about 5 high school students that form our evaluation team. One person acts as the head of evaluation, and then we have 4 evaluators. So before anything, our young people went to a couple workshops to understand the importance of evaluation and how it can support our organization to do the work that we do and improve how we meet our mission. So before we even start teaching them what is evaluation, how does the process look like, we have to ground it in, okay, like what's the purpose of doing all this, and why do we have young people leading the evaluation for our organization? So LIGHT is funded by Ontario Children Foundation's Youth Opportunities Fund, and so we have a third-party Students Commission that helps us with our evaluation. And so our evaluation team sat down with the representative from Students Commission to create an evaluation plan for our overall organizational goals. And so they started off by discussing like who is our target audience, and then our young people are the ones who said, okay, this is what we think that our priority outcomes are. And so they decided on through our programming, they want Ontario youth to be engaged in their communities, which includes engaging youth in the ways that work for us, ensuring young people know about opportunities and nurturing participatory values. And they also decided that they wanted youth to leverage their assets to address social issues, which includes helping individuals, communities, and organizations be more receptive to youth ideas, but also collaborate with us, supporting youth-led innovation. And then they continued to lay out the inputs, the outputs, the indicators, the data collection methods that the young people thought that were best. And the young people addressed that they thought, surveys were important, interviews, focus groups, using photography and videography as a more creative way of collecting data, social media posts, like using activities such as like the snowball fight, head, heart, feet, graffiti wall. And then they discussed how results were going to be analyzed and compared, and how they were going to create changes for next time. So Students Commission and our evaluators worked together to develop a strategy for our organization, and including like discussing the roles that Students Commission was going to take, and that our 5 high school students from LIGHT were going to take to meet the goals of the project. So it really is a youth-adult partnership where young people and adults are sharing the decision-making around the evaluation process. And really it works because there is one person, one adult from Students Commission who is committed to communicating with us and supporting us through any processes.
Great. Thank you very much. So what we will do now is we'll open the floor to questions and comments. So for those individuals that are attending the webinar, we'd like to hear any questions you have related to that evaluation planning process. Maybe you even have some insight or strategy that you'd like to share that has worked really, really well for you. Or you can pose a question specifically to one of our guests or myself, really around that process. So I will let Katie kind of field those questions.
I think this question would be for any of the panelists, speaking to the fact that obviously there were a variety of ways that youth were engaged and through different formats. So for example, workshops were held that youth attended in order to sort of demystify some of the language around evaluation and to stress the importance and to make it meaningful and relevant for young people. But one of our participants asked about the level of engagement that those youth may have already had in the program, and how do you engage a diverse group of young people outside of compensation? So what are the ways in which organizations are engaging young people in the evaluation? Is it simply those who are already participants or co-designers of the program, or are we reaching beyond that group in terms of youth who are part of the evaluation process?
Okay.
I can jump in first if that's okay. So in this case, youth were all participants of the respective food-based programs in these 4 organizations. And they were hired as like they were paid for, this was like their job to be in this program. So they have had some of them have had some previous engagement in more leadership roles as well, because a lot of these programs would have like a setup where after the first year of participating in the program, the next year you become sort of like a youth mentor to the new youth that come in. So some of these youth that were youth researchers were actually youth mentors, so they were more in senior positions. But some it was their first time. Definitely keeping them involved or keeping them engaged throughout the process was a bit of a challenge, but that's why kind of focusing on a more structured approach with the workshops and kind of working between was really important. And compensation was important, of course, but that's also because for a lot of them, this was a great first job opportunity, something they can put on their resume and be proud of. So that was something, you know, the organizations decided. So, and the other thing that I wanted to mention is that a key important aspect of this was that all 4 organizations that were participating, they had a commitment. So they were already committed to engaging youth in programs, having a stronger voice. They just kind of first time involved them in evaluation, but they were already really committed to having a youth voice being strongly represented. So that was a really key thing.
Excellent. Thank you, Olga. JJ or Liam, if you have anything to add? Or Katie, if we have another question.
Yeah, just quickly, I'll add to that too.
Yeah, of course.
This is, we have the benefit of having lots of programs under the same roof, but with the youth that we work with, one way that we've found is a successful way to keep them involved is bring them in as volunteers into different programs and set that as one of the goals that they can set for themselves. So if they want to work on leadership skills, they want to work on job readiness skills, goals that they're setting for themselves, trying to line that up with volunteer opportunities. So based on who the youth is and what their goals are, they may say, end up being a summer camp counselor in one of our programs, or they may commit an hour a week to being a volunteer on our inner city programs, or even we bring them up for a special project. So the goals and the results, we try to line up with each individual youth and what they want out of the programs, but really trying to build a culture of involvement and trying to allow them to connect with that at their own level helps us to build that involvement.
Great. Thank you. And I think Liam's point there really hones in on the overlap that we see between program development and program evaluation, right? So by maybe being part of the evaluation process and focusing on those outcomes associated with that, we can also allow youth to strive for and work towards goals by having them involved in other programs in terms of more being a volunteer and the staff in that respect. Excellent. Katie, are there any other questions or should we move on?
There are lots of questions coming in, and if we have a minute, maybe we can take another 1 or 2, and then there will be other opportunities for questions. So we'll try to make sure we get to everyone's before the end of today's session. One question around when does program evaluation become research? And so how, if you're engaging young people as both participants in evaluation and as evaluators, are there any issues that folks should keep in mind around consent?
That is a great question. I can speak to that a little bit first, and then I'll let our guests jump in. Thinking about the notion of consent, I think, is important regardless of youth, whether it's youth engagement, whether any sort of youth participant. We should always ensure that there's fully informed consent to be involved in the process. So whether that's the actual program, whether that's the program evaluation. But thinking about the fact that research and evaluation are two very different things, and we can have evaluation that informs research and research that informs evaluation, but evaluation is really contextual to your specific program, your specific organization, and I think we can learn from, as other organizations and other programs, from your evaluation findings. But research is really to kind of disseminate and inform knowledge, kind of to that broader scope and to that broader field. Whereas evaluation might not necessarily, that might not be the goal. The goal might be for program improvement and understand what actually works within your specific program, your specific organization. And it might not always be the case that you want to kind of inform that larger scale of things. I'm not sure if anybody else has anything they'd like to add. If not, we can maybe take one quick question and then we'll move on.
A specific question came up for Olga because of the example that she gave around the sort of online engagement versus the in-person engagement.
Okay.
And specifically, Olga, if you have any strategies that you can share with folks around how to engage youth online when you can't have those in-person sessions.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that was a challenge that I guess is something that it's hard to address in fully, because it still will be a challenge all the time. But what we tried, we brought them in. We brought the group from Thunder Bay on GoToMeeting, so they like similar setup like here. So they were kind of a screen in the room when they participated, and then we tried to plan two times where the group came together all like in person. So one was that workshop that I mentioned, and the second time was when the youth presented at the conference in Ottawa, which I will talk about a bit later. So we tried to work into the program early in the process, a session where people meet together, and so that would build relationships that can then be sustained digitally. And also sharing, we had a shared website we created through Google that basically where we put all of the materials and youth could access it and share online. That was maybe not necessarily, that didn't pick up as much. It had to be kind of managed and moderated, but that was an idea of having something like that that would help to continue building that relationship. And so that was one strategy that could be, again, improved. So we tried a couple of things, but again, yeah, it's definitely a challenge that, and we, going into the program, we knew this was a challenge, so there was a lot of discussions about how to address it. So just trying a couple of things. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Olga. Okay, so we will continue on, just so that in the being mindful of time, we want to make sure that we have time to go through all of the processes of the evaluation process. So we'll jump to the evaluation implementation. So looking again at YouthRex's framework, we're really going to look and focus in on collecting evidence. So, and how youth can actually be involved within this process. So once we've developed our logic model, we've developed evaluation questions, figured out who's actually going to be involved in the evaluation process, what people's roles are going to be. Now we want to understand how we're actually going to, the tools that we're going to use, and actually get on the ground to collect evidence. So again, we're going to go through that process of having our three guests share some of their experiences and what's worked well for them, and then we'll open the floor to questions.
So in our program, as I mentioned, we started learning about methods for data collection early in the process, where we had youth create the videos about the different methods. And then based on that, they were able to kind of really understand the variety of methods that were available to them, and then choose the ones that really spoke to their specific interests, and also that matched the questions that they were interested in. So, and it was interesting to see that a lot of youth, the different groups chose different methods based on kind of what kinds of questions they were asking, and what the like the interest of researchers in the group were. And actually, a couple of groups wanted to combine different methods together. So what you see on there on the right is a combination of head, heart, and feet and Photovoice. So this was done by the group in Thunder Bay, and basically there they organized workshops where they brought youth who were participating in the different programs, in the food-based programs of the organization, to a workshop. And then they drew these outlines of a person. And then the photos were selected from a shared database from the organizations, all the photos that everybody contributed to. And then youth were able to select a photo that went for, head, heart, and feet, like head being what did you learn, how did you feel, and the kind of what can you do now, what do you want to do with it, that resonated with them. And then they left a comment or description of what the photo represents to them. And so, but the combination of the workshops, so doing this in person and combining different methods, worked really well. Other groups tried to do more of a online based process. Again, they combined Photovoice and storytelling. This was one of the groups in Toronto. So they sent out a survey where they asked other youth to upload a photo and then describe what it meant to them. And some other, in other groups, youth actually focusing on the workshops was another kind of commonality. So a youth would actually bring the organize the workshops and bring other youth in the same room, and use whatever method that they're using with them. And another group also relied on some of the existing data, so they kind of brought in some of the previous data into their evaluation. And then a journey map was another method that one of the groups used, where they basically illustrated. This was, I guess, a more designed version, but they kind of just documented their journey in the program. And then we also had the youth transcribe the data and organize it afterwards. So that for some people, actually learning the process of transcription from a focus group was a very kind of illuminating experience, because I've never done that before, and they didn't realize how much time it was going to take. So, so kind of going through the process of collecting and then organizing and transcribing the data was really important to kind of help them understand the entire process.
Excellent, thank you, Olga. All right, so we'll jump over to Liam.
Thanks, and Olga, those all sound amazing. We're in the first few months of this, so we're introducing new things to our youth, but there's a lot I think we can do to, once we introduce these tools, to allow them really to take them and take ownership of them and choose which ones they want to take on. So one big thing that we've noted right from the start is just the importance of knowing your audience. So our youth may be as young as 13 or as old as 16, and the older youth, we found it may be a little bit easier to sit down at a table with them and have a discussion going over certain evaluation questions. But what's really clear is with this group and with any group, I think it's really important to use a variety of approaches to make sure that everyone is engaged. So with our oldest LITs, we started off this process just by asking them some very basic questions, things like, what do you need out of this program? What do you want to get out of this program? What do you want to look like? What are traditions that you want to keep? What are some things that you want to switch up? But with our younger youth participants, we really realized quickly that we would need to take a different approach towards engagement. And that's when we really started to look at alternative evaluation activities, really getting away from just asking for responses on a piece of paper or around a table and getting them actively involved in the process. So that's the second piece, is really just being creative and making evaluation an active process. So encourage movement, encourage discussion, encourage everyone to get into the process, and maybe even forget that for a moment that they are there just to answer questions and work together to make the program better, but really just to get involved in the activity and have all the information come as a byproduct, rather than have everyone focusing on what they on answering the question itself. So some of the things that we've tried out so far are activities where we try to encourage the youth to be active in response. So I'll go through a few of the activities that we've done so far. One is called Fire and Ice. So we've asked the youth to stand in the middle of a room and say the left side of the room is very cold and the right side is very hot, and the middle of the room is neutral. And we'll have the evaluator ask a question and the youth respond by moving to the end of the room that represents how they feel about an answer. And we're able to then track those answers the same way we would say track numerical scaled answers on a survey. So having youth respond, but be active and have a bit of fun with it as well, and then use that to debrief and follow up on why did you answer this way? Why did you respond this way towards another question, and try to get a discussion building that way. Another thing that we've done, and there's a picture of this on the slide, it's called Skills and Opportunities, is getting youth to take turns writing skills that they would like to build through the program on a large sheet of paper with one color of marker, and then in a different color marker getting them to write down the desired opportunities that they want through the program. So really getting them to not only tell us what skills they'd like to build, but what opportunities they'd like to unlock through those skills. And then finally giving them some length of yarn or twine or anything, and have them connect the skills that they want to build to the opportunities. And what we realized here was that youth were not only able to tell us what skills they wanted to build and what opportunities and how they linked to each other, but we had an unintended consequence that really the board turned into a giant maze of yarn, which turned out to be a great unintended outcome, because we were able to not only see what skills and opportunities the LITs had noted, but they were able to reinforce each other's ideas. So the skills or the opportunities that were covered in yarn, almost impossible to see at that point, we knew that those were the skills and opportunities that the LITs most wanted to achieve through the program. Olga mentioned Photovoice, so just on that, I'll mention it's a great project. We've used it for a couple of years, and I've been in rooms where youth are able to share their stories and share their photos, and the stories that they have told and shared with the rest of the group were extremely in depth, and certainly stories that I don't feel we'd be able to draw out through a traditional survey on a piece of paper asking them to write down their experiences. So it's certainly a powerful survey or evaluation method to get the youth involved in. And finally, just working with YouthRex. So we've been really grateful to work with YouthRex's Eastern Hub, working out of Ottawa, and we've had the support to create customized evaluation methods with them. And most recently, this involved a logic model workshop where we invited current LITs, past LITs, volunteers in our LIT programs, program managers, and had everyone around the table and everyone participating as an equal stakeholder to populate the activities and the outcomes that we are going to be using to drive our evaluation questions.
Great, thanks, Liam. So I will turn it over to JJ.
So for an example of an evaluation implementation, so every summer we hold a camp for newcomer and refugee families. And so our evaluation team helped, along with our program team, set up the priority outcome for the camp as Ontario youth have educational experiences that respond to their needs and prepare them to lead. And then they decided that the 3 specific outcomes for the camp were also going to be defined as understanding of social and emotional skills, formation of healthy and close relationships, and motivation to learn. And then they went on to set up the evaluation questions. So in addition to also evaluating the camp participants, they also wanted to evaluate the experiences of the camp leaders. And so because the goal for the camp leaders was that they were engaged in their communities, the outcomes as they set for the leaders was based on the leaders' experience, enjoyment, knowledge gain, and making of meaning. And so in addition to using surveys for the camp leaders, they also use surveys for the camp participants. So one of the issues that we encountered was when we were collaborating with Students' Commission, there was a lack of communication between the young people and the adults at a point where our young people thought the only option was to use surveys on camp participants. But when you're giving 6, 7, 8-year-old children like pages of surveys, it's not really that effective. And maybe there was some misunderstanding in that process, and our young people didn't know we could use other tools, like art-based tools that we were already using in the camp, but we didn't know that they were like evaluation methods. And so having a meeting back to recollect and say, okay, this is our experience with evaluation. We didn't think the surveys were really effective. Is there any other methods that we can use? And once we had that communication going, then we were able to change up our evaluation for the rest of the week, because it's a 1-week-long camp, for the rest of the days. Not only do the young people bring the surveys to the event, explain to the participants, collect the surveys, help informing the surveys and what questions we use, but our young people also host focus groups based off questions that were sent to us by Students' Commission. But then we tell Students' Commission if there's any questions that we believe are missing, suggest new questions, take out some questions, modify it, and then get it approved by Students' Commission so that we can use those questions for our focus groups. And they host these focus groups completely by themselves without an adult with them, but they went through a training beforehand with Students' Commission. So they take notes, record, and then send in the data. And then also helping with the findings, which we'll go into later. Yeah.
Great, thank you, JJ. So what we'll do is we'll open the floor to any questions or comments, and I will let Katie field those as well.
A lot of folks have been asking questions about examples of activities, and I know in this last section, a lot of our panelists outlined in detail some of the activities that they used. I just also want to flag for folks that you can find an inventory of measures on our website. I'm going to send out a link in the chat box to everyone. And just to let everyone know, that's youthrex.com/measures. We've been getting lots and lots of questions, and I just want to remind everybody that in the handout section of the control panel, you will see that we have today's slide deck, and there's contact information for all of our panelists. So if for whatever reason we're not able to get to your question in the 90 minutes we have, please do feel free to reach out to YouthRex or to any of our panelists with your questions. I did want to ask, there have been a few questions around how do you sort of mitigate barriers to participation for young people? We've talked a lot about the activities themselves, and we talked a little bit about how to frame content for younger participants or younger evaluators, but do folks have any strategies for making sure that any barriers to young people participating or being engaged are addressed?
I can speak quickly to that. Just first off, I think a lot of the barriers that we often think about in terms of youth engagement is around burnout, is around cost, time consuming, and often this notion of like adultism, where it's rooted in the belief that youth are there is that hierarchy that's present, that adults are superior in that. And I think a lot of the stuff that we talked about today, trying to minimize that gap and make sure that it is a collaboration, it is a partnership is a big piece. I think a big piece that Olga mentioned is the fact that they are able to financially compensate their staff, their youth from being involved in this, and that I think helps a lot with barriers in terms of time and resources for youth. And then one quick thing I'll speak to before we open the floor to everybody else is thinking about how we often see evaluation and time as a big barrier when we are conducting evaluation. So thinking about ways that we can double our program activities as also an evaluation activity. So a lot of the arts-based activities that have been brought up today on the webinar, I think a lot of those can also be used as an activity. So that you're not asking youth to say, hey, can you come at a different time outside of program time, and keep asking for more and more and more from them, because that's when burnout happens, or you're only selecting one or two youth all the time to always be involved, and then they really experience that burnout, or you kind of have that notion of tokenism. So having that opportunity to duplicate some of your program activities as an actual evaluation activity too is really helpful, and I think helps minimize that barrier around youth engagement. So if nobody else has anything, I think we will continue to move on. We still have 2 more rounds of questions, so what we'll do is we'll keep moving forward on talking about creation and dissemination of evaluation findings. So going back to Youth3X's framework, the creation and communication of those findings really, once we've collected our data, collected our evidence, we're now moving into analyzing, interpreting, and animating our evidence. So having youth involved in that analysis process, again, bringing in new perspectives, which I think are really unique, because youth might have experiences, or they might see things in different ways that adults do not, and then understanding how we can actually communicate those findings and learn from our findings, both internally and externally, is really, really important. So when we think about that analysis and communication piece, we can think about how youth should actually be informed, and we might not have all of our youth as part of our youth adult partnership in this youth engagement piece that are involved in the program. So making sure that the youth that are involved in the program, but not in that necessarily at that larger capacity, making sure that they're informed, helping learning different ways to interpret and analyze those findings. So again, thinking about transcription, thinking about coding, looking for themes and patterns, some job ready skills. So if you have surveys, looking at quantitative tools and analysis techniques, but then also ensure that youth are actually part of that dissemination process. And involved in actually presenting those findings. So having a youth adult partnership in the dissemination, or again, having those videos that were created within Growing Out, or having different videos or knowledge products that that can be used in terms of funding requirements and communicating various social media avenues as well. So what I will do is I will open the floor again to Olga.
Thanks, Corliss. So again, with our data analysis, we took a very integrative approach. So this was a workshop, again, where we brought everybody together, and we chose one of the data sets from one of the groups as an example to work through in the workshop. And we picked one that had a very kind of rich combination of qualitative, quantitative, and visual data, so that we can address all 3. And we created a very immersive environment for youth in that workshop, where we actually posted on the wall all of the posters that were produced, and then we printed them out and another copy that they could actually work with hands-on. So the approach was that they had to go through all of the data sets, and they worked in teams, and they looked for and they picked one of the 3 or 4 areas that were identified, themes that were identified in the planning of the evaluation. So one of them was, for example, you can see self-esteem and confidence. So then they went through the entire data set and looked for either qualitative, so textual data, visual from the Photovoice, or they counted, in terms of quantitative, they just counted certain instances of words, for example. And then they created new posters where they basically took the quotes out of the original data and put it together with the visual evidence that supported this one point. So they kind of disaggregated the data and kind of like hands-on coding, and they brought it into a new, they reorganized it into these new buckets of themes based on what they thought was most relevant coming out of the data. And then each team presented back their ideas, so that was like the kind of synthesizing of and analyzing the findings. And then we worked with them as a kind of more conversational discussion piece of kind of translating those into insights. So not just focusing on like what does the data say, but what can we learn out of that data? What does that mean now to our programs? What does it say about, for example, in terms of the impact that the program is making in self-esteem and confidence area? And in that workshop as well, we then created, we had a handout for how to plan a communication plan to share the findings. And they had things like key messages, who's the audience, how are you going to share the message, and youth then used again this data, the sample data, to come up with some messages and potential communication plans. And then following that, we had separate, more in-depth meetings, working meetings with each of the research teams, where we went through their own data and did the exact same process that they were already familiar with, so they were able to do it and see how to apply this in their own data set. And really that process of actually analyzing the data on your own, and I was just there as sort of like a coach, an advisor. It was really, you could really see how youth were excited about the findings, that they were like, they said, we suspected that this might have been the impact, but really to see that this is coming out of the data was really meaningful for them. And then one last thing that we did to really share, to kind of one big communication piece, we brought everybody, all of the youth researchers, to Bring Food Home conference that Sustain Ontario organizes every year, and they had their own session where they presented their findings, and they either did a PowerPoint presentation that described their evaluation process and what they found, or one group made an animation, another group had a video that they pre-recorded, and then they were panelists in a panel discussion where they were asked questions by the audience, and some moderated questions about what they learned, and reflecting on the evaluation process, but also the findings around what they found in the impacts on the programs. And this, to be honest, this was one of the most successful things that we did in the project, because it really, this was, for example, for some people, this was the first time speaking to a professional audience. Some people, it was the first time traveling to another city. And it was such a great experience, because youth were able to, they were actually presented as experts, and they were presented there on the stage, and they were able to speak candidly and openly, and also with the background of the knowledge and having the data in the background, and being able to present it to a professional audience was really something that was rewarding and highlighted the value of doing the youth-led evaluation process. And I can speak more to that if there's any questions, but definitely something that I would recommend for groups is to plan kind of a communication event that you're working towards throughout the program, because it kind of created a direction, but also created like really a point where people were able to, so youth researchers were able to actually speak to the, like, internalize the knowledge and speak like experts, essentially. That was great.
Excellent. Thank you, Olga. We will switch over to Liam.
So as I mentioned, this is still a new process for us as we go through the development, redevelopment of the program and what evaluation looks like in it. So for us, as we're building from the ground up, it's going to be really important to keep youth informed as we go through the process. So meeting back with them, say after we do a logic model, here's kind of what we've got. What do you think? After we run through an evaluation process, here's the data we collected. What do you think? But what we really want to do is make sure that we're integrating evaluation into the program structure itself. So making sure that the programming week to week, and this was something that was mentioned earlier, but the programming week to week involves, say, different evaluation strategies that are part of the programming structure themselves and really becomes part of the fabric of that program. And part of that is our plan that as youth in our programs get older and older, they become more and more integrated into a similar strategy to what Olga was mentioning, but really getting them more and more integrated into the program as evaluators and as the individuals who will be making sense of this data and helping make decisions on it. So for our oldest youth who are in grades 11 and 12, which we call our LIT youth ambassadors, having them, since they'll be the youth that have 3 or 4 years of experience in the program, having them really get involved and learn about and then take on and make this evaluation process their own will allow us to give up some of the control, which is always one of the hardest things, and give that control to these youth and show that trust and really give them that opportunity to make this their own. So we're not only using the evaluation to learn how the program is going, but we're also starting to use it to empower the youth so that they take on a little bit more with each year that they're with us.
Excellent. Thank you, Liam. We'll switch over to JJ.
So my main takeaway in terms of evaluation findings is to really not undermine the capacity and the potential that young people have to write reports and analyze data. So our young people have written several reports, and the most extensive one was for the week-long summer camp that we did last summer. And it was a 28-page report that they did with a full background where they defined terms and they analyzed the survey results. And they also designed the report so beautifully as well. And to see them be really proud of this final result that they put together, and then to have them share the findings with our team at our full team meeting where we had our full team come together, about 50 young people. They shared those findings with the team. They suggested notes for improvements. They met with the evaluation team, met with our directors of training, which are also high school students, and spend time with the director of the program to help create plans for improvement. So I think another huge point is that the feedback loop is super important, so that they see that the work that they did preparing for that huge evaluation report feeds back into improving our programming to be better. So it's not only that they enjoyed the process of basically becoming these investigative reporters, but now they really see themselves as change agents because of the way how they analyze the data is informing our programming to become better as well. So I think that's super important too. And then the last thing is because we also have a third party helping us to interpret the results. So sometimes Students Commission is the one that will write the final report, bringing that back to us and then communicating the findings, and then us providing context on, for some of the results. So we say, oh, the reason why this happened is because of so and so. So one of the spaces where this has happened is with attendance numbers, for example, for our conference. So that, during that time there was a business competition, it was raining that day, so this is why so and so happened and why people may have felt this way. So I think it's super important that you have young people providing context to some of the results for your programming.
Excellent. Thank you, JJ. So I think what we're going to do, just for the sake of time, we have about 10 minutes left, so we're going to skip this round of questions and comments, and what I'd like to do is have each of the panelists just take 1 minute, maybe 2 max, just to talk about and share some of their lessons learned throughout involving youth within the evaluation process. And then just to make sure that we can get those main take homes out to our audience, and then we'll finish up with some questions right at the end from the audience. So I'll switch it back over to Olga just to really speak about some of the lessons learned and take homes from Groundswell.
Thanks. So one of the key lessons, you can see a bunch on the screen, but just wanted to focus on the first one because it was really important. In the very, very last meeting that we had together as a big group, we focused on reflecting on the process that we just went through. This included inviting youth recs to actually conduct a focus group with youth researchers, to have them, to provide them with an opportunity to actually reflect on how the program was organized and what they learned. And then we reflected together as a group on the process of data collection, analysis, and every step of the evaluation process. And this was really important because although we reflected throughout the program, but having the final kind of look back was really important to kind of drive home some of the lessons and that weren't even coming from us. Another, let me pick another one out of these, is really the focus on building the ownership by youth researchers of the entire process with all of the activities was really important, because then it wasn't, it really changed the dynamic, and it wasn't that the organization, it wasn't that the managers were kind of driving the process, it was the youth researchers who were driving it, and then they were able to then go back to the organization and provide their recommendations, and they felt that these were you know, their findings, and this was like their voice represented. And some of the youth actually presented to the board of directors, and then presented at different other activities in the organization to share back what they found. So building that ownership and that leadership by youth was really key, as some of the other ones I already mentioned. Was there another slide, Corliss?
Yeah, there is.
Yeah,
if you want to maybe pick one quick one from here, and then we'll go to the next group.
Yeah, I mentioned some of these, like working towards a significant milestone. Across another interesting thing was that bringing together 4 different organizations and youth from different places, different neighborhoods in Toronto and in different parts of the province was really, really valuable, because they first of all built a kind of a network together with other youth that are working on similar programs in food. There was a shared interest in food security and food justice among the group. And so that was, it really built those connections, but also really learning together from youth that come from different contexts and different experiences was really valuable to the entire group. And I would definitely recommend thinking about how you can connect people from different places together as part of the evaluation.
Perfect. Thank you, Olga. Okay, so we'll switch over to Liam.
So just some of the Coles notes of what we've learned so far, and we're constantly learning, is one is just the importance of planning ahead. So making sure that your plan schedule is flexible and realistic for the nonprofit environment. So if things change, and when things change, you're ready, and you have some flexibility for making sure you have that time to commit to this evaluation process with the youth you'll be working with. Being open and honest with your goals. So let youth know exactly what the goal is, and bring them into that goal, and allow that goal to change with their input. Invite all feedback, both positive and negative, so that it's constructive to the process. Plan for your audience. Use an evaluation approach. Multiple is obviously best. That is appropriate for the youth in your program. So be realistic that evaluation process may have to change. You may have to look at different methods that are more relevant or more accessible for the youth you're working with. And then finally, just looking for those hidden opportunities. So thinking of evaluation more than a survey that keeps you on track with your outcomes, but all skills in the process. So it's more than just a way to collect data. Really, at the end of the day, this is a way to empower youth and allow them to grow just as any other type of programming you provide would.
Perfect. Thank you, Liam. So we'll switch over to JJ.
So the one I really want to highlight is the first point about creating an evaluation plan together from the start and discussing the collective vision for the evaluation journey. So not to just throw young people into the evaluation process and say, oh, we want you to, come up we want you to host a focus group, but really grounding it in the importance of evaluation. And I think it's really important that we think about, who are our programs for at the end of the day, and why do we do what we do? So it's for the young people. And so who to better set a vision other than the young people you're trying to make an impact for, and really clearly defining the roles and calling out the power dynamics of the adults and the young people in the room and who's going to take on what responsibility, and really being transparent about the whole process and setting accountability measures.
Great, thanks, Jaden. Short and sweet. So I'll turn it over to Katie, who is going to take us home with final questions. But before we do that, we're going to launch one more poll. And Katie, I'll let you facilitate that.
The question is, where can you see your organization more purposely engaging youth in evaluation? So we see the votes are coming in. We'll just give it a few seconds more for people to be able to participate. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to share the results here. And it looks like overwhelmingly, those who participated in the poll indicated that they will see their organization more purposefully engaging youth in evaluation in more than one part of the process, which is great to see. A few people specified evaluation planning or implementation, of course, creating and disseminating findings, but 68% said in more than one part of the process. So thanks to everyone who participated in that poll.
Excellent. And do we have any last questions that we can ask to the panel?
Yeah, I think a question that came up from a few different participants is around timelines. So, a few of the panelists spoke to the importance of planning ahead and being transparent with young people and engaging them in evaluation processes. But people are wondering how much time is required to meaningfully engage young people in evaluation, and how do you balance that with the actual timelines that you need to implement in order to evaluate a program or project, which could be based on requirements from third parties or funders. So if anyone wants to speak to that, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll let some of our panelists that are on the ground heavily involved in that maybe speak to that a little bit.
So I'll just jump in here quickly. I think one of the first things is it's always impossible to plan everything perfectly. It's always going to be impossible to line up everything with, say, a grant funding proposal. So I think a really important perspective is just to realize that it's always going to be a fluid process and it's always going to be changing, but that's okay. So even if you're starting in the middle of a program, even it's always going to be changing, and to be okay with that will save a lot of time and maybe a little bit of stress. But we've tried to set things up so that we have about a 2 to 3 week buffer. So our program meets once a week. So by giving ourselves a buffer of 2 to 3 weeks, if something does come up, if we do
Sorry, I think we lost Liam at the end there. The audio cut out. Apologies for that.
Does anybody else have any insight? I guess we're coming close to 12:30, so I might just take you guys home with a few take-home messages. So being mindful that youth engagement happens on a continuum, and it can happen multiple phases of the evaluation process. And again, try not to bite off more than you can chew. Try and engage youth in a way that's feasible for you, your organization, but also for the youth themselves. Making sure that it's meaningfully engaging youth, so that it's not just we're doing this because we have to or we should, because it looks good for our organization or our program, but making sure that it's that you're engaging youth in a way that's quite meaningfully, and they're internally or intrinsically motivated to engage in the process as well. And then listen. I think you can never underestimate that the value, and I think that's kind of been a take home and a consistent message from last webinar last week and this week, is really to make sure that you're listening to those young people, because they have important insight and thoughts and experiences that can really inform and contribute to the evaluation process. And then being creative, so allow youth to do so as well. So being creative, we know that time is always a challenge, so doubling up as program activities as also evaluation, but also allowing youth to combine different methods, as Olga has suggested or was done, making an opportunity for them to kind of create, be creative, and kind of come up, taking ownership and taking full control. So Katie, I'll pass that over to you. I'm not sure if anybody wants to stick around if there are a few more questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us. Apologies for any issues that folks had with the audio, and apologies for not being able to get to everyone's questions. I will remind you that the handouts are available in your control panel, and there is contact information again for all of today's panelists, for Corliss as well. So please feel free to reach out with any questions that are burning that we weren't able to answer today. And remember that there will be a recording of today's webinar, and there is a recording of part 1 of this series available on YouthRex's website at youthrex.com, and on the Exchange for Youth Work at exchange.youthrex.com. You'll be able to find the Youth Measures inventory there as well. We are going to be taking a break for the summer, but we look forward to announcing our fall webinars in the next month or so, so stay tuned. Thank you again, everyone, for participating today. Thank you so much to Corliss and Olga, Liam and JJ for sharing your insights, and we look forward to connecting with you on our next webinar in the fall. Have a great summer, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.